Welcome back. We are at part 4. I'm not going to keep count because this is meant to be going all year and I will lose count, but welcome to part 4. We are now getting into the second of 5 sections in Matthew, and this is chapter 8 through to chapter 10. So just a quick recap. The first section, or the first preach of Jesus, the narrative that leads into Jesus preaching, was the Sermon on the Mount. The second one is found in chapter 8 to chapter 10. And it's what's called a triad of triads, which is a bit weird, but it just means that Jesus tells 3 groups of 3 stories. A triad being 3 stories, and then there's 3 groups of these 3 stories. And these stories are all around the idea of what does it look like when you live in the kingdom? When you bring the kingdom, what does it look like? So it's broken up, right? So we have 3 stories, follow me, 3 stories, follow me, 3 stories. And so it starts off with these 3 sort of stories that talk about the healing power of the kingdom. Story number 1 is Jesus sort of cleanses a leper. Then there's the story of the centurion servant, and then the healing of Peter's mother-in-law. So you've got these first sort of 3 stories. And then Jesus talks about follow me. I actually love this. He says, foxes have holes, birds have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. The reason why I like this is because it's kind of cool that, see, foxes don't live in holes and birds don't live in nests. They reproduce in those spaces and places. So it's kind of like Jesus going, I don't yet have a body to put my head onto, which the idea is to reproduce myself. You see, the idea of the church, that Jesus is the head of the body, is so that we then go and reproduce the kingdom wherever we go. And I think that's kind of cool. But he finishes off that statement with, follow me and allow the dead to bury the dead. Now, I am denied about talking about this because let's be honest, that's a fairly crazy verse. Follow me and allow the dead to bury the dead. But what I will say about it is we need to have some cultural understanding of the day. When they say, so the story is that somebody comes up to Jesus and says, I want to follow you, essentially. And Jesus says, well, let's do it. And he said, well, I've got to bury my father first and deal with all the funeral arrangements. And Jesus says, no, just follow me and let the dead bury the dead, which from our perspective seems quite heartless. But from a cultural perspective, that kind of context, that first century Jewish context, what it means is, it doesn't mean that his father was already dead. It means that maybe his father was elderly, maybe not. But what he was saying is, I'm going to go back, I'm going to look after my father, I'm going to do life, we're just going to whatever. And then when the time comes, I will look at burying my father. And then what happens is 12 months later, they get the bones and put them in like a burial chamber. So in other words, the idea of this is going, look, I'd really like to follow you, but I just, and he's put this indefinite kind of non-committal kind of sense. And Jesus going, no, if you're going to follow me, follow me. It's not really in this heartless idea of this poor guy's father has just died. That's not the cultural context. Anyway, point being, 3 stories, cleansing a leper, centurion servant, Peter's mother-in-law, 3 healings, 3 power of the kingdom, and then a follow me, followed by 3 more stories. The story of Jesus calming the storm, casting out demons, and healing a paralytic. So the first 3 stories was about the kingdom, or Jesus's, but the kingdom's power to heal. The second lot of 3 stories is about Jesus, or the kingdom's power over those kind of worldly or spiritual kind of situations or scenarios, that Jesus is bigger, that God is bigger, better, kinder, stronger, closer, and has more power than those spiritual kind of attacks and those worldly events. And then Jesus goes into his next follow me story, which I really love, because it's actually about Matthew himself. And it's when Jesus comes to Matthew the tax collector and says, come follow me. And I think this is a really great insight into the focus and the point and the purpose of Matthew. Marty Solomon from the Bema podcast, he hypothesizes that this could be why Matthew has such a focus on the restorative nature of the kingdom, or on Jesus's teachings around the widow and the orphan and the marginalized, because he was one of those. As a tax collector, he was marginalized. He was sort of left out and outcast. And anyway, so then that goes on to talk about three last stories, which is the healing of the sick girl and the sick woman, the healing of the two blind men, and the healing of a mute man. So this is the initial context up to the end of chapter 9, the narrative story, these three triads, these three stories, follow me, three stories, follow me, three stories, which Matthew is seeming to indicate that in order to live in this power of the kingdom, what is connected with that is that we need to be following Jesus. Following Jesus and the power of the kingdom seem to be connected. See, the people that were distressed and dispirited. I love this. So the very sort of last couple of verses of chapter 9, it says that Jesus saw these people, saw these people that were struggling. Like everybody just looked out and he saw the dispirited, distressed people. And he said they're like sheep without a shepherd. And he felt compassion on them, lamenting that the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. In other words, again, this is not about getting to heaven when you die. It's about there's not enough people getting heaven to these people. These people need a shepherd to guide them to green pastures, to lead them to still waters, to refresh their soul. And if only there was more people to come and show compassion to these people, to bring the kingdom and the power of his kingdom along to it. So it's in this context that Jesus engages his second preach. And his second preach is all about sending the disciples out 2 by 2, and that's chapter 10. And I haven't had time to have a look, but I wonder if there's some kind of connection to Noah there. But be that as it may, Jesus sends out his disciples not on their own, go together, go in groups of 2. And then he starts to communicate to them what the power of the kingdom looks like, but also what to expect when you bring the kingdom wherever you go. That number one, a lot of people are not going to accept it. Number two, a lot of people are not going to like it. Number three, it actually could end up doing you harm. In this case, it could have resulted, Jesus' warning, of physical harm or prison or worse. But for us, it's probably more around the idea of harm to our reputation, or harm to maybe even some of our relationships. And so if it happened to him, don't be surprised if it happens to us as well. But the bit I really want to take from this sort of preach that I think is fantastic is he does say to them, if somebody doesn't accept the message of the kingdom, if somebody does even reject you as a person, shake the dust from your feet. We take that to mean leave everything behind, that so then take nothing with you and just forget about it, wipe them off, cut them off. But that's not actually what it means. See, the dust of your rabbi was something that you aspired to. What would happen is that a rabbi would walk and his disciples would walk single file behind them. And the rabbi that was kind of like had done the best for the day would be the one closest to the rabbi. And the rabbi would have these shoes that would kick dust up. And so when you finish walking and it'd be like, look at all the dust I have. I've got the dust of the rabbi. I'm covered in the dust of the rabbi. Shane Willard tells this great analogy about how we're all covered in the dust of something, covered in the dust of our shame, our pain, our past, covered in the dust of, what our parents or a trauma or whatever. Our aim is to be covered in the dust of our rabbi. And so in this particular case, it's not cut them off and leave them and curse them. It's the opposite. When we shake the dust from our feet, it's actually leaving a blessing with them, that despite this, we love them, they are blessed, and we want to leave something of a blessing behind. We don't want to just cut them off and curse them. We want to still love them, even though they may not have loved the message. Well, that's it. So this is, I don't know, it feels quicker. Maybe it wasn't, maybe it was, I don't know. But let's leave it there because that is the end of Jesus' second preach. We'll come back next week and look at the third lead up to it and the third preach and how Jesus is going to speak into that. All right. Love you. Bye-bye.